Hey guys, it's Harriet and welcome back to my channel. Sydney Marathon have just made a huge announcement including unveiling their course for the 2024 marathon. And I have some feelings. In this video, I'm going to talk through those changes and their bid to become the 7th World Marathon Major. But what right do I have to talk about this stuff? I actually lived in Sydney for over 5 years, and in 2017 I supported my mum as she ran the marathon. You can catch the vlog of it here. In 2022, I went back to Sydney to run the full marathon myself, and in 2018 and last year, 2023, I ran the half marathon, which is usually the same weekend. So I know a bit about the city, I'm really familiar with the marathon, and I have been so invested as they've gone through their bid to become a major. So let's start with the course. Anyone who ran the Sydney Marathon in 2022 or earlier would have done the OG marathon course. There were a few variations of this. It kind of seems like Sydney Marathon have tried to wipe it from the internet, but here is the best photo that I could find of the course from 2022. The start line was under the harbour bridge on the north side of the harbour in a place called Kirribilli. Super convenient to public transport and just a 2-minute walk from the train station. Runners crossed the harbour bridge and headed out towards the east, past Hyde Park and up Oxford Street towards Centennial Park. Once in Centennial Park, runners had to do a full 9 kilometers looping around the park. Now for those of you who know Sydney, Centennial Park is beautiful, but it's not super accessible from the city, and that means that it was really quiet. Runners entered the park at around 12 kilometers and didn't come out until 21 kilometers, which is halfway. Personally, I found these 9 kilometers incredibly lonely and a real mental challenge, and I wasn't even halfway through the marathon. And whilst we're here, take a look at all of these twists and turns in the course. It's pretty intense. After surviving the park, runners went back down Oxford Street, through Hyde Park over a very dodgy makeshift bridge, and headed out towards the west of the city to Piermont. The final 15 kilometers had quite a few twists and turns again, not super great, not super heavy on the spectators, and it was a tough course. However, the final kilometer of the race went under the harbour bridge and looped right around Circular Quay to finish under the Opera House. It was spectacular. So that was 2022 and earlier. In 2023, last year, Sydney Marathon had a crack at changing the course. What changed? Honestly, not much. The best thing about it is they removed 100 meters of elevation, which was top notch. Now, last year, Sydney were really pushing themselves as a World Marathon Majors candidate, which meant that the number of runners increased from 3,500 to about 13,000. As you can see from the map here, the start line stayed the same in Kirribilli underneath the harbour bridge. And this became a problem because the facilities in Kirribilli weren't able to cope with 13,000 runners. For the course itself, instead of heading out to Centennial Park to begin with, they kind of flipped the course. So runners started heading out west towards Piermont first. To be honest, I have a sneaky suspicion that this change was to do with road closure requirements, but I have absolutely no basis for that. Runners then headed through the city, up Oxford Street and towards Centennial Park. Once at Centennial Park, nothing actually changed. The runners still had to do that ridiculous 9-kilometer loop around the outside and then back out. As you can see, from 18 kilometers to 35 kilometers, the marathon is a whole heap of out and backs and loops, all in this area of Sydney, which is super hard to get to from the city. After the Battle of Centennial Park, runners headed back down Oxford Street, did a little out and back for 3 kilometers to Mrs. Macquarie's chair, and then the final kilometer of the course was downhill to the Sydney Opera House. They kept that iconic finish line. Very notable, they also removed the dodgy bridge in Hyde Park, which 10 out of 10. So I didn't run the course in 2023, but my personal opinion is that this left a lot to be desired. Now for 2024, Sydney Marathon have had another crack at changing the course, and they've made some big changes this time. The start line is a little further north now at the North Sydney Oval, and this is huge for Sydney Marathon because it means they'll be able to cope with tens of thousands of runners as they would have to for a world marathon major. It's also still pretty accessible to train stations. It's just a 1 kilometer walk from North Sydney. And for the race, runners still get the incredible experience of running over the harbour bridge, and they still hook off towards Piedmont in the first stage of the race. A few of those ins and outs and turns have been removed from this part of the course, which is incredible. Runners then head through the city, up Oxford Street and towards Centennial Park. And this is where the big guns have come in, and they have made some huge changes. As you can see, the out and back now goes much further down Anzac Parade. There is this little hairpin that they've added onto the course, I guess to make up the distance, but we won't complain too much about that. Because then runners get to go and do one loop of Centennial Park. One loop. I was so excited when I saw this on the course map. It means that the runners are in Centennial Park for less than 4 kilometers. Amazing. Top-notch change. And then the rest of the course looks pretty much like it did in 2023. Runners go back down Oxford Street, do that little out and back at Mrs. Macquarie's chair, and then they have 1 kilometer downhill to finish at the Opera House. Now, everyone is going to have their own opinions on these changes, but personally, I am stoked. I think Sydney Marathon have made a ton of changes in the right direction and are really putting themselves up there to have the best chance of becoming a major. Let me know what you think about the new course in the comments. There are a few other aspects of the race worth talking about. Firstly, the Expo. Some people couldn't care less about a marathon expo, but for a world marathon major, it's almost as important as the race itself. Now, historically, Sydney's Marathon Expo was located in a place called Town Hall. Super central, but it was a very small location and a very dingy room where you just picked up your number and there were a handful of exhibitors. Last year in 2023, they scaled this up, but it was located way out of the central city in a place called Alexandria, which was kind of tricky on public transport, although a much better site to hold the expo. In 2024, they've made a huge improvement and the expo will be located in the ICC in Darling Harbour. This is the perfect location for the expo and means that Sydney will be able to show off one of its most beautiful tourist spots. Another massive improvement for this race. And then there's the topic of the other races. Now, this might have gone under the radar for some people, but historically this event was called the Blackmore's Sydney Running Festival, and there were 4 races over the weekend. The marathon is the headline, the half marathon, a distance around 10 kilometers, and one around 5 kilometers. I don't think they were ever exactly that. Now, last year they did keep all 4 events, but this year they have announced they're scrapping the half marathon. Personally, I'm a little bit gutted because I loved this half marathon, but I get it, it was kind of inevitable. It's so hard to run a decent half marathon the same weekend as doing such a huge scale marathon, which is now the focus for Sydney. Sydney Marathon have announced though that they are still putting on the 10 kilometer race in 2024 and a 4.2 kilometer mini marathon, which I think is amazing because it keeps the day super inclusive and means that it gets more people into the city. That's it for my rundown of the Sydney Marathon 2024. Let me know what you think and your opinions in the comments below. Overall, in 2022, I was kind of skeptical about Sydney becoming a major. But with these changes, I think they are making all of the steps in the right direction to make themselves a decent candidate. So I'm excited to see what happens. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.